Good morning. Is everyone all adjusted after daylight savings? No, not yet. Not so much. Your daylight does not feel saved. No. I thought we all voted to stop doing that a while back. Do you remember that? Yeah, well, it's not happened because I don't know anybody who said, oh, yes, please, let's keep that. Right? The way I understand it, most folks in the way back whens, they were agriculturally, that was their trade. They had livestock, they raised crops. So daylight savings was literally to save the daylight so that they could work while the sun was high, and businesses would shift to accommodate them. So they didn't have to work within business operating hours and they could still accomplish life outside of that. Now most of us are not farming, right? So and businesses are open later and earlier. So I think we should let the agriculturally employed people who support our country incredibly, I will say, let them manage their daylight for Pete's sake, right? Give them the option. That's all I'm saying. In any case, I'm really glad to see those of you who have adjusted. It's really cool because we're doing some big stuff, right? We just completed 5 weeks of working through anger into love, right? We didn't solve anger. We are using it as an impulse to move toward love. And if you weren't here for those talks, or if you missed a couple, you're going to want to go onto our website or Facebook or YouTube. They're all there now because Facebook now only keeps the sermons up for 30 days. So we real quick grab them and we put them on the other platforms. Go on there and catch up. You can even speed up the video and listen to it faster, but it'll give you all the meat, right? Catch up because we've gone through that whole thing and we're on to week 2 of giving up our guilt and shame that we cling to as though we love it, don't we? But that's what we're working into. We're on week 2 of that, and then the next 3 series of 5 talks. If you haven't noticed, that's how I work, right? I pick a theme, we do 5, and then we move into the next one because I think that 5 allows us to really take some steps and move toward it. So the next 3 series of 5 focus on hope, trust, and then surrender. So although, right now we're wading through some really maybe tough and heavy stuff maybe for the next few more weeks, we're then going to embrace more and more light. Right? It's going to get brighter and brighter. And by the end, it'll be the brightest it's ever been because we are all going to surrender into loving kindness, right? I feel like that is the natural course of things as we begin to awaken to all of the things that we have not been able to see through the noise of ego. Because that's really what it is when our brains start talking to us, right? And we start getting afraid and self-conscious and all those things. That's ego. And that's where I want to start off today, that noise of ego. Because again, that's really what it is. Do you guys see that? When you're saying nasty things about yourself, it's your ego saying, you cannot get out of line because you see these are the flaws, so I need to take care of you. Right? Remember that brain cartoon that I shared with you last week, if you were here, where the voice of our brain starts speaking? Right? Just as you're trying to fall asleep. Do you guys do that too? Yeah. So you're trying to fall asleep and your brain goes, hey, what's up? I'm here. You want to hang out? And it's got a really nasty, aggressive tone of voice, and I do not appreciate it. As a mother, it would absolutely get a timeout if I had any say in the matter, but it doesn't give me that space to do it. You know what it makes me think about? One of the things that pops into my mind is a time in the 7th grade, and I know we've all done this right about the same time, right? When we go to the bathroom and then we walk out and we don't realize until we've walked through the whole school, back to the classroom, and sat our fanny on the very cold seat, when we realize that our skirt is tucked in back of our pants. Anybody else? No? Was that just a me thing? Always tucked in your underpants. And that seat is awfully cold. Nobody tells you when that happens. They just go, oh, ooh, look at that. Yeah, that was me. I did that. I did. And it was a new school too, which was made it so much more fun. But really though, we all kind of pull that kind of stuff up at night to some degree or other, right? If we didn't, there wouldn't be so many memes about it. And there are a lot, like this one, okay? Brain at 3 a.m. I can see you're trying to sleep. So I'd like to offer you a selection of every memory, unresolved issue, or things that you should have said or done today, as well as in the past 40 years. Right? And I laughed out loud at this next one because it's so relatable. And poor Molly, the little dog, she has to be there when I'm writing. So her bed comes up and she's parked and I go, ha! And she goes, she did not appreciate that at all. But this one I got. Alexa, turn off my brain so I can sleep. Don't you wish it was that easy? My gosh, but that's really all that we can do, right? Oh, and I'm going to say for you people at home, if I said that out loud and Alexa heard me, can you let me know if it turned off your brain? And if so, what that feels like? Because I may be jealous. But let's go and have a look at what we've been doing the last week. So if you haven't been to one of our Wednesday services, you're going to want to come by when we get a chance. Because when we're in there, we come up with all kinds of new ways to look at the things that we've been talking about, right? And sometimes we deviate entirely and talk about something brand new. Last Wednesday, as we reviewed that first part of the story that I told you last week about Giant and his wife Chameleon, we got to the part that maybe seemed a little disjointed about how Chameleon was ashamed of her tail. And she thought if everybody, if her husband, if the world saw her tail, they would see what a disappointment she was. And how that she noticed that when she had her daughter, Precious, she noticed that Precious didn't have one, and she was really glad for that. Until Precious had an experience which made her decide to take on shame, and then she started growing a tail. And that is a concept that it really wasn't clear to understand in this book by Jane Middleton-Moz. And that book is Guilt and Shame, Masters of Disguise. That is her opening story. So last Wednesday, I came up with a way of looking at it that made it make sense. Okay, so let's examine another embarrassing thing that some of our brains might be keeping us awake with. Has anyone ever experienced this, or do you have a fear that one day you'll go to the bathroom and discover much too late, probably after you've left the bathroom and walked around a room filled with people for a while, you will find that you have a tail? Right? A nice, long, really embarrassing teepee tail. Maybe, I don't know, 5 or 10 squares worth of toilet paper tucked inside your waistband. That is not too far from the truth for all of us when we look at it closely. And I think that this idea is kind of what she was alluding to in the story when she talked about Chameleon's tail and how the longer it got, the more ashamed and embarrassed she felt, and the more she believed that she was worth less than those around her. So think about a roll of toilet paper. I know this is going somewhere, I promise. Think about a roll of TP for a second. And that, I will say, is a sentence that I never thought I would say up here. But here we are. So, TP, besides having more than one ply, hopefully, right? Because any option other than that is scary. So TP is made up of a bunch of little squares, right? So imagine if we wrote down everything that we ever felt ashamed or guilty about, every self-critical thought, every limiting thought, about how insufficient or how not enough or how unworthy we are. One event, one thought per square, right? We wrote those down on each square, and then we attached all of those squares to our backside, and we had to wear it for all to see. We would all have really, really long tails. The older we are, in many cases, the longer our tail might conceivably be. I'm just saying my tail might have been long at some point. And I think that that's what she's talking about in the story, right? Her tail, T-A-I-L, is really her T-A-L-E tail. It's her story. It's what she's telling herself. Chameleon and her daughter began to grow tails when they felt insecure or ashamed. And you remember how Chameleon's tail began to shrink as she became more confident? That shame and those feelings started to disappear. And I think that we can all find it really relatable when we look at the tail from that perspective, right? And remember, as we're listening to this story, we're trying to find parallels to our lives and also the people that we know, the people within our lives. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, again, go online and listen, because you'll need it for context as we move forward today, because we're going to pick up where we left off. So the last time we saw Giant and Chameleon's daughter Precious, she had run away into the forest to cry after feeling ashamed. And her crying drew the attention of a helpful being called Human Being. She had heard of human beings, but she lived way up high where everyone was giants, right? When she said this to the human being, when she said, I'm a giant, I've never met a human being, he told her to go look at her reflection in the pond behind her, because then she would see that she's human too. Not believing this, lo and behold, she looked, and that's exactly what she saw. And she said, but I've looked in mirrors. I've never seen myself like this. Human Being replied, most mirrors only reflect back what you think yourself to be. The pool of water that you just looked into is the pond of clarity. It shows you as you are. Most are afraid to look. They're afraid to see. It's a shock to change perceptions. And Perfect felt enraged. Why have my parents not told me? Why have they insisted I was a giant? Why do they lie? I hate them. Almost as fast as those words left her mouth, Perfect felt overwhelming guilt, and then almost as quickly felt small again. I can understand your anger, Human Being said, but I'm sure they only saw you as they needed you to be, perhaps as they saw themselves to be. The world is strange sometimes. I'm sorry you've been hurt. You know, not far from here is another pond, and it might help. It's called the Pond of Timelessness. And I've seen that it's helped many others. Please let me take you there. Perfect climbed out of the tall grass fully and stood next to Human Being. She looked down and quietly said, I'm so ashamed. I feel so stupid, and I don't know why. Perhaps we can find out together, Human Being said softly, aware of Perfect's embarrassment. Perhaps it'll be easier if you can keep telling yourself that you're a human being, no more, no less. We make mistakes. We're not always perfect. I am. Perfect laughed for the first time. That's my name. Perfect. What? Came the reply. Never mind. She said, so how do we get to this timelessness place? It's just up the road, he said. Come on. We'll be there in no time. And as they walked, they shared about their lives. Perfect began to feel a trust in Human Being, a trust that she'd never felt before. A warmth grew at the center of her being. I did poorly on a test today, she said bravely, feeling her color change and hating it. Is that a problem? Human Being asked. Precious paused. She had to think about that. Well, I thought it was. Okay, was it a subject that you usually do well in? Is it your favorite class? I usually do well in everything. I've never known what I liked or what I didn't. I never thought about it. I was just busy doing things well. It's odd to think of liking or disliking something because, look, human being interrupted, there's the pond. As they got closer, Perfect felt a strange sense of fear come over her. She wanted to run. Don't worry, human being said softly, gently taking Perfect's hand and leading her to the edge of the pond. Many feel a little frightened here. It's difficult to see things as they are sometimes. Change can be very frightening. I'll be right here with you. What should I do? Perfect asked, unsure. The pond of timelessness has stored within its depths images of our lives. As you look into the pond, think back to your childhood. It will reflect back to you memories that have supported your beliefs in yourself. Will you see the images too? Perfect asked, feeling more frightened again as color flushed her face. Only if you wish to share them, human being replied, understanding Perfect's shame. As Perfect stared into the water, she began to see an image of herself as a little girl. She was standing outside her house. It was winter time. She realized it was her birthday. She appeared to be 3 or 4 years old. The snow was very deep, and the little girl stood crying. A small child, she was stuck, buried past her waist in the snow. Perfect abruptly turned away from the scene in front of her. What a stupid child, Perfect cried. She never could do anything right. I remember that day so well. Looking at it makes me feel the same as I did when I looked at my test paper today. I hate that little girl inside me so much. She was always so clumsy and stupid. Look at her, she's stuck in the snow, so instead of figuring a way out, she starts crying and acting like a baby. Human being looked into the water. You were young and frightened. You were cold and hurting. Why isn't someone helping you? Why would anyone let a child suffer so? Where's your mother or your father? Perfect looked again into the water and saw her mother standing close by the child, taking her picture and laughing. She saw her father angrily looking down from the upstairs window. Why was she taking a picture when you were in such pain? Human being asked. You must have been very frightened. Perfect felt a pain growing within her and she began to cry. She hid her face as she turned away from the scene in front of her. I don't know why I'm crying. I'm sorry. You mustn't see me like this. Don't apologize for your tears, human being said, gently touching Perfect's shoulder. You're crying because that child you were seems so alone and afraid. Why doesn't she just get out of there? Instead of being such a crybaby, isn't she smart enough to figure it out? She's a little child. She's stuck. She can't move. She needs help, but nobody's paying attention to that. Why isn't anybody helping her? For the first time, Perfect looked and saw herself as the child. She'd never thought of herself as a child. She felt that child's pain and realized that her tears were for that child's loneliness. She felt what it was truly like for the little girl she really was. And for the first time, her shame seemed to dissolve. I was never a giant, she cried. I was just a little girl, a human being. Perfect came back many times to the pond of timelessness in the months that followed. Human being always sat by her as she saw more and more images reflected in the pond's clear waters. She began to feel stronger. Neither a giant nor a chameleon, but very human. She began to like being a human being. As time passed, she enjoyed her friends' kindness and companionship. She began crying without hiding her face or turning colors. She laughed more and learned to play. Perfect joined the human beings and lived contentedly ever after. Giant came out of his room and once again took care of Chameleon. and they lived as they always had, in the high places. And here is where my version of the story and Jane Middleton-Moz's diverge. She's a psychologist, and a very good one. She's done a lot of incredible work. And from a psychologist's perspective, the priority is figuring out where our guilt and shame began so that we can move past it, we can understand it and move on. And in her version of the story, there's a lot of blame focused on the parents, right? Why were they laughing? Why weren't they helping her, right? And that shifts the guilt and shame into anger, which, yes, helps us stop feeling those emotions of guilt and shame, stop thinking about ourselves from that perspective, but it doesn't remove or heal the emotions. Rather, it often shifts them into something new, a feeling of victimhood. Remember, everybody speaks victimese. That was Marvin's quote. He's sitting back there. We're not speaking that language anymore. That shifts those feelings into victimhood and anger or resentment toward the people and the situations that we feel now are to blame for putting the ingredients for guilt and shame into a pot and stirring it, right? And while, yes, the guilt and shame can begin to be dissolved, it then becomes a whole new set of ingredients which we put into that recently emptied pot. And before I move into my next thought, I'll say here that there are a great many truly incredible people in my life who come from a background in psychology, and they have done incredible things, transformative things to help people. So please do not misunderstand my thoughts about the intentions of those in that field, okay? My friends and family members who are in that field went into it with the sole intention of helping others heal and empowering them so that they could stop feeling pain from the thoughts that they have surrounding events in their life. But I realized while writing this talk that this approach of shifting our old limiting thought and emotion patterns into new, often just as limiting thought patterns, it was a really great business model for the early pioneers of the traditional school of psychology, right? It keeps people coming back to work on each set of new beliefs, hopefully to weed them out little by little and come to resolution. But although I absolutely do want you to keep coming back, please, my job is different. While I agree that for some people, it might be helpful to understand where the feelings began, my job is to help people see both the reasons behind those feelings and our beliefs about ourselves and others through the eyes of love. So let's look at that childhood memory of Precious's again. There she is, she's stuck in the snow and crying, and her mother is laughing and taking pictures while her father looks on angrily from above. So in that story, we can see how it might be hard for Precious to see that experience and others like it through the eyes of love, right? But let me ask you, how many of you in here today, how many of you online take joy in watching others suffer? How many of us here routinely laugh when others are frightened or hurting? Not one of us, right? It's clear from the story that Precious's mom, her life, her whole world revolved around Precious, right? She wanted the very best for her. She wanted Precious to be everything that she thought she couldn't be. And she tried to do everything she could to keep Precious happy. She adored her daughter, right? So do you think that she was intentionally cruel? Do you think that she was intentionally invalidating Precious's fear and pain that day? Of course not. But who heard that part of the story and maybe felt a little bit of anger toward Chameleon for laughing and taking pictures when her baby was crying in the snow? Who maybe felt a little upset with mom in that scenario? I did. When I read this, though, it made me think about my mom. And as those of you who know her are aware, my mom is magical. right? My mom is magic, and I couldn't possibly, and I mean this, I couldn't possibly see anything that she has ever done in my life to be anything less than perfect. She is truly extraordinary, right? And I can remember how she sometimes guided me in childhood when I was taking things in a tough way. As a kid, I really had an incredibly tough time interpreting social cues. So whenever somebody teased me playfully, I took it very, very personally because no one in my house teased or played in that way. And I was an only child. I can remember one time in particular when I was a teenager, and I was a very insecure teen, but I masked it really well, right? So we were on a trip for a choir competition, and I was talking to a small group of the really popular girls about something that had happened that day. And the one girl's reaction was to say, "Shut up." Now, we all know that what she was really saying there was, "Wow, really? Oh my gosh." What I heard was, "Why are you talking to me? Ew, shut up." Do you see where I was coming from? And when my mom would witness or hear about times like these, when others were clearly not being mean at all, she'd laugh, modeling the reaction I would have had if I'd understood. And while she laughed, she would explain how that interaction was actually the opposite of uncaring. That the person on the other side of it all was really trying to connect with me, not push me away. And it helped me. It didn't stop me from misinterpreting new situations, right? But I will tell you that the next time somebody said, "Shut up," I understood. I understood what they meant, and that helped me to feel included and supported. So it seems to me that what Chameleon might actually have been trying to do is convey, "Oh, sweetheart, it's just snow. It's for playing in, it's not scary. It just looks that way to you right now because you don't understand it, but it's fun. It is. Look, don't you see how happy I feel in it?" And as for Precious's father, Giant, angrily looking down from his room in his high place, we all know why he was angry, right? He was angry because he felt left out. He felt like they didn't need him anymore. That last week's story painted that picture clearly. And his anger didn't have anything to do with Precious or her mom. It had to do with his feelings about himself. I would like you to consider starting a new practice with me, one which I really believe it'll help us to process our feelings of guilt and shame. Remember how we learned to use the impulse of anger as a cue to find the fear that's behind it, and then use that new understanding to move forward in love, right? We've figured that all out. We're going to use the situations in our past which make us feel guilty or ashamed. Those thoughts that our brains start screaming out when we want to sleep, we're going to use those. I'm not talking about the random scenarios, because we do that too, right? At night, we're like, "I wonder what B's knees actually look like," right? Those random thoughts. Those are not the ones that we're talking about here. We're talking about the memories and feelings of embarrassment, the walking across the room with your skirt tucked in your pants. We're talking about those, okay? So we're going to use those to figure out where those feelings are actually coming from. And the idea for this exercise, it came to me through a conversation with a friend recently this past week, and she was sorting through some pretty raw anger. And she had written down all of her angry feelings, and then she read them to me. And she got really angry when she read them to me. She saw that it was ego. She said it herself. She saw it and recognized it, but she was angry. And we sat there, and I got a hair going in my eye, and this is not helpful. Hold on, I can't see a dang thing. There we go. So we sat there, and we talked about everything going on until we made sense of where they were really coming from. And it was someplace way, way, way in her past. She was coming from a place where she felt that her comfort was being violated. right? She found her peace and she was like, oh, I feel so much better. And then I asked her to reread what she had written from this new place of understanding, right? And she got angry all over again. All of those feelings that she had poured out onto that page came right back up, even though she understood them now. So we came up with a new process for sorting through anger, coming from the perspective of that wolf story that we shared a couple of weeks ago. Remember that story? Again, check it out. It's in the anger series. The story about you have the light wolf and the dark wolf living inside all of us. If you weren't here for the story and you don't have time to go back and read it, let me know. I will send you a link to the actual story. It's not the one you think you know. That'll help this make sense. Well, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start 3 separate journals. Okay, when we're dealing with anger, guilt, or shame, all of them, we're going to start 3 journals to help us move past it. The first journal represents the dark wolf. Okay, it's for writing down all the ugly stuff, all of your feelings, and you can say all the mean things that you would have said if you did not have some self-control. Those things, write all that noise in your head, write it all down, okay? Express it, get it out on the page. The second journal, completely separate. Do not keep it in the same book. This is really important. It's for figuring out the feelings of fear or not enoughness that is behind those ugly feelings we're holding on to. Pull it apart to see what the truth is behind it all. And you may find it goes way, 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 way back. Because remember, again, there's only one thing. There's only one state of being which is real, and that is love. Everything else is fear. So we paint that fear into all these other colors, and we call them guilt and shame and anger and rage and all of these great many other things, but it's fear. We have to figure out where that fear originates. So you're going to use journal 2 to figure out the fear state behind it all, okay? And journal number 3 represents the light wolf. It's for working out how to see it through eyes of love. Do you see how the process works? Now you can, as you do this whole exercise, you may revisit what you wrote in journal 2 to help you see your way to that love place. But never, ever, do not, period, reread journal 1. Okay, that is a hard and fast rule. Do not reread the icky feelings because you have to start all over again. Okay, let them stay there. Do not reignite it all. You do not want to feed the dark wolf 2, 3, 4, 5, however many servings, and never get to where you're feeding the light wolf. If you reread it, that may happen. Do this work. You are worth it. You are the most precious and amazing person I have ever met. Every one of you. You are the only one like you. So you're exceptional. This is another step towards seeing yourself as you really are. And as you've always been, that perfect expression of divine love, the most incredible individualized expression of God. 3? You want them again? Book 1. This is Dark Wolf. You write down all the ugly stuff, all the bad feelings, all the thoughts that make you feel small or angry or any of those fear labels that we put out. That's book 1. Book 2. Figure out what's behind those great big feelings. What is the fear state that brought those feelings up? Okay? You're going to sort it all out and figure out where it originated. For my friend, it was because control gave her comfort. And in the situation, her control was being violated. And we realized that there is no control because if there was, it wouldn't have been violated, right? And that gave her peace. So that is what we're trying to accomplish in book 2. Book 3 is how can I see this now through eyes of love? So you can revisit 2, And you can dig all you want in 3, but do not look back at 1. You use 1 to write, not to read. Okay? So the thing is, we're all here. We're here for a really incredible purpose. We're here to fill a divinely ordained plan, and that is to let God have a wonderful time through you as you. And that's the truth of it. Thank you.